What's up, Wizards? It's Dev, SBMTG, Magic Things. And you know what? Zendikar Rising? Bit of a weird set, right? It seems like a lot of people have a lot of different opinions about this thing. Is it good? Is it bad? Largely depends on who you're talking to, but just like with any other set, that's bound to have a lot of cards that fall through the cracks and are either misevaluated or they're just paid like zero attention to whatsoever. That's a bit of a crime. So today we're going to spotlight 10, really 11 cards that need a spotlight, whether because they'll never get any attention ever again or because they're actually the best cards in Standard and you just don't know it yet. So today, top 10 Zendikar Rising sleepers, but you knew that when you clicked on the video. Why do I even do these intros? But I'm back, and the chicken is here. Waverly has decided to join us for only the briefest of moments, I'm sure. She doesn't usually stay long. But anyway, we probably should talk about Magic cards. I think that's why you clicked on the video. Although I also think a lot of you would be totally okay with 20 minutes of cat content. But I might as well start talking about cards here. So let's kick it off with the honorable mention for the sleepers list this time around. It's Resolute Strike. See, Waverly's already gone. She doesn't stick around long. But anyway, as far as this card goes, looks pretty innocuous at first glance, right? Just one white mana for +2/+2 at instant speed. We've seen this thing countless times in different forms. It's a limited combat trick. You play a copy or two of it in your aggressive deck, and that's pretty much it. Not this time, though, actually, because the other bit of text on this, I think, is incredibly important and might actually make it Standard playable. If you're targeting a warrior with this spell, you just get to slap an equipment on it. And if you're playing Boros warriors or Boros equipments, you've probably got an Embercleave laying around, or at least it's in your deck somewhere. And that makes Resolute Strike way, way better. If they let any warrior in on attacks unblocked, then you can basically, for one mana, just instant speed equip Embercleave to it and give it an additional +2/+2, which is really sweet when the creature is now a double striker. So just because Embercleave exists, I think that this card is probably better than you think. But speaking of equipments, we got a couple of them on the list, and I'm going to start at number 10 with an equipment that I don't think is getting anywhere near enough attention, and that is Mind Carver. Now, just one black mana for +3/+1 when this is fully powered up is a better rate than Unholy Strength, which is one of the most celebrated auras in the history of the game, but it gets better than that. When they kill the creature it's on, you don't also lose your Unholy Strength. This sticks around, and even though it costs 3 mana to re-equip it, which is kind of a lot of cake, let's be honest, it still doesn't go to the graveyard when they kill the creature, which is a big deal. Especially considering once you get 8 cards in their yard, you're probably going to keep 8 cards in their yard for the majority of the game, unless they're escaping Euro or whatever. I get that. But in a lot of games, once you've got 8 cards in the yard, it's going to go from 8 to 10 to 12 to 16, and it's not going to, once you've got 8 cards in their yard, it's very likely going to stay a +3/+1 bonus for the remainder of the game. And it's supposed to go in a deck like Blue-Black Rogues that has plenty of evasion, whether it's creatures have flying or its creatures are just straight up unblockable. There are plenty of ways to get through for 6 damage easy. Just slap it on a Brazen Borrower for a whole 1 mana and you're swinging in 6 damage. So I could actually see this not being too bad in those Blue-Black Rogues decks. Although I will say it has to make the slots for this card, and that might be a little bit tough considering Blue-Black Rogues is so stacked right now. But I could see certain really aggressive builds of the deck actually wanting to run this card, so don't write it off. Now at number 9, another black card that I don't think people are really paying enough attention to. And it's one of these flip lands, right? It's a land that comes into play tapped on one side, it's a spell on the other, and these are by and large getting a ton of attention. But this one isn't getting the attention I think it deserves. It's Polaka Predator. Now, of course, I like alliteration. And it reminds me of basketball. That scene with the Malaka board. Polaka it's a good word and it's fun to say. But at the same time, I think this card might actually have some real applications in Standard, right? If you're a control deck, you want to run this, first of all, it's either extra land drops. That's pretty good. Or conversely, this allows you to run fewer lands in your control deck, which might be important too. We're still not quite sure if we're going to effectively run more or fewer lands because of these cards, but either way, just like all the other flip lands, it allows you to do that. The cool thing about this is that against aggro, it can just be a land drop or something because the actual card, half of it's not going to be great, but against combo decks, against the Yugen ramp decks that we know are going to be a factor in the format, against other control decks that will run things like Dream Trawler or Ashiok or whatever as win conditions, a card card like this might actually be really, really sweet on turn 3. So I'm not saying it's the best card in the world. All I'm saying, and the whole point of this list, is maybe pay more attention to it than you did before, because I haven't heard anybody talking about this card. And cards like this have seen some very tiny amount of play in the past. Even the recent past, right? Total the Invasion snuck its way into a deck or two, so I wouldn't be surprised to actually see some amount of 1 or 2 of play here and there, especially if there are tons of decks that play 4, 5, and 6 mana threats that they can't deploy until later in the game. A card like Predation might actually be really good at getting those cards out of their hands. So it's no Agonizing Remorse, but Agonizing Remorse isn't also a land drop, so pay some attention to it. Now, number 8, let's take a look at Aura Skyclave Hierophant. Now, I've heard plenty of people talking about wanting to build Party. I've heard people talking about wanting to build Rogues, obviously, Warriors, and yes, there are some people that want to build the Clerics deck, but nowhere near as many as say want to build Rogues or whatever. So I just haven't really seen that many people talk about this card or the Clerics deck at large, but even when I see people talk about the Clerics deck, they talk about like the 3-drop 2/2 flyer that gets +1/+1 counters and stuff. I rarely hear people actually talk about this card. Maybe the evaluation is that it's a little bit expensive, but it's almost always going to replace itself unless you just don't have any targets in the graveyard for its ability when it dies. But that's one of the things I like most about this, is that cards like this in the past haven't always counted themselves, right? It's just when another cleric dies or something, you get this ability. But no, in this case, this will almost always replace itself when it dies with something in your graveyard, which makes it pretty good, even if you don't get any further value out of it, right? A 3/3 lifelink body is at least kind of decent for stonewalling some aggro decks. You kill one of their guys and you gain some life back. That's going to be relatively difficult to swing into, especially considering even if you do chump block and your guy dies, you gain 3 life back, you probably kill their guy, and you get to put another dude onto the battlefield to replace this guy. So I actually think this looks pretty decent, and it has some interesting implications for board states, right? You slap down Aura, and then suddenly your opponent has to think twice about attacking at all, because any clerics that die in combat are probably going to bring other things back too. So there's a lot of really cool things about this card, right? Your opponent is now, far less likely to be able to get real value off of a sweeper once you have this out. There's just so many cool dimensions to this card that I think it's actually tons and tons of juice for the Clerics deck, even if it is a little bit expensive to cast. Once it's on the table, it does all kinds of things against all kinds of decks. But at number 7, another equipment, but this is the last one. This is the last one. This is the last one. We're going to talk about Maul of the Skyclaves right here. I actually think this thing is really dope. Like 3 mana for +2/+2 and, some keyword abilities is pretty decent on like an Aura, right? But just like all the other equipments, when your creature dies, you don't just lose your Aura. So you're not just getting like 2 for 1. It's nowhere near as risky as an Aura. And for this rate, that's actually a pretty good grouping of abilities. It sticks around for mostly ever, unless your opponent has artifact removal or something. But especially in best of 1, and even in most cases in best of 3, your opponent's not going to be able to really deal with this. So once you have any creatures on the table, then even 1/1s become like really potent threats, right? But if you play anything bigger than that, then suddenly your opponent has to kill it. So I really like the threats this thing can represent, and imagine putting it on a bigger creature, questing beast or something like that. But in like a Boros equipment deck, I can definitely see you having to make some slots for this equipment, because it's probably in some ways the second best equipment in Standard, right after Embercleave, although I think there is a huge gap of playability between the two cards. I will say, as far as like if you're ranking equipments in Standard, it's probably Embercleave and then this, after a fairly wide chasm. But that's still an interesting, chasm. After a fairly wide chasm, a crevasse, if you will. I think this card is the number 2 equipment in Standard, and that's got to count for something. Yeah, probably Shadow Spear. I forgot Shadow Spear, but still, it's in the top 3. That's not a bad Magic card by my estimates. So I like this thing, and I'm not saying it's going to show up everywhere, but it does seem like the kind of thing that gives aggro decks a little bit more reach in the late game, and if they top deck into even a small creature, this thing will make it a relatively large creature with an evasive ability. But here we are, number 6, ladies and gentlemen, Nahiris Lithomancy. It's crazy with all the people talking about Gruul Landfall. I haven't really seen anybody talk about Lithomancy, because this looks like it's obviously meant to be a sort of game-ending card in the landfall deck, right? You cast it for X equals 3 or X equals 4. That deck is probably going to ramp, so it's actually not unrealistic to cast this for a total of 6 mana. You know, X equals 4, sacrifice 4 lands, draw 4 cards, put like 2 or 3 lands out, get the landfall triggers, and get in for the damage house. So that's one thing you can do with this card, but honestly, this is like a control deck or something. I could see this being somewhat playable, because some control decks really won't mind sacrificing like 3 lands to draw some cards. Now, there's probably better things you could be doing with it. There's probably better draw a card spells you could be playing in your control deck as well. But I do think that a card like this is interesting in a few different dimensions, not just the landfall deck, but just any deck that's looking to have explosive turns, draw a bunch of cards all at one time, and especially decks that have extra lands, of which there are a few. Not just the ramp decks in the format, but control decks that go into the long game. You know, Abzan and Sultai decks that may exist in this next format that are also going to be really grindy, get tons and tons of lands. You know, they might be able to fit a card like this. Not necessarily the Abzan decks and the Sultai decks, but, you know, if there's like a grindy Mardu deck or something like that, or a Jeskai deck, then I could see a piece like this somehow making its way in. But just for its applications and rule landfall, I could definitely see this being a 1 or 2 of in those decks, just to make sure that you get like, you know, 3-4 landfall triggers all in the same turn, because there's going to be a point at which you don't really need the lands that much anymore anyway, and you'll take the triggers. Also, kind of a good combo with Cavalier of Flame. Want to point that out in Historic? Maybe that matters. Just sacrifice a bunch of lands and then kill your own Cavalier of Flame and dome them for like 12. It could work, but anyway, we'll move on to number 5 here, which is Kaza Royal Chaser, another one of these multicolored legends. And I have seen people talking about some of the gold legends here and there, but Kaza is probably the one that I've heard them talk about the least, which is mind-blowing. This card looks really, really good to me for a whole bunch of reasons. First of all, we've seen these, you know, blue creatures that are effectively mana dorks, but they only tap for like instants and sorceries. We've seen these a bunch of times throughout Magic history, and this is probably like one of, if not the best version of that we've ever seen. But it also has haste, so it can tap the turn that you play it. That's probably relevant if you've got a couple of wizards on the table. You know, if you untap, let's say you cast a turn 1 wizard, turn 2 this, and then turn 3, you can suddenly cast like a 5 mana instant or sorcery. Or you can drop a wizard, right, and then tap Kaya. Am I calling? Is that the right name? Kaza. I apologize. Kaya's rotating. But Kaza, you just tap Kaza after you play your turn 3 wizard, and that'll make like 3 more mana to cast an instant or sorcery with. So, you know, you can really easily double spell on turn 3, or you can just cast, you know, cheat on like a 5 or 6 drop, depending on what your wizard sitch looks like. So there's just so many cool things about this card, and it's probably sweet in historic wizards alongside like Adeliz too. So I look out for this thing, man. It looks like you can actually make a good amount of mana with this, and yeah, I know. The way the thing is worded, they can like kill Kaza or kill a wizard as it resolves, and then you won't get as much mana. I really don't care. I really do not care about that. All I care is that this is a 2 mana dork sort of, that can tap for like 2 or 3 mana in the relative mid-game, and that is really dangerous, y'all. But anyway, I'll get to number 4 on the list, which is a card I'm actually really excited about, and that's Felidar Retreat. Why is no one on this? No, seriously, I haven't heard like anybody talk about it. When I brought it up on Twitch the other day, a bunch of people in my chat were like, "Oh yeah, Retreat is awesome." But I haven't really heard anybody just come out and say, like on Reddit or Twitter or anywhere, that like this is a card they're looking at. Boy, and I am. I absolutely am, because here's the spiciest it takes, ladies and gentlemen. I said this on Twitch the other day too, and people, I'm not sure how people reacted. So let's see how 30,000 people react to this statement. The first mode on this is Field of the Dead. It's just Field of the Dead. You play a land, you get a 2/2. Field of the Dead was banned. Now, Field of the Dead is free. It is free to play a Field of the Dead, but you usually can't activate it until you get 7 lands out anyway, so usually Field of the Dead started proccing on like turn 4, and that's what this card does. Just throwing that out there. But Field of the Dead also is a land, so it's a little bit harder to interact with as an enchantment, but an enchantment's not the easiest thing to interact with in the world either. Right, so I know Black just got enchantment removal in this set, so it might matter, but for the most part, enchantments are still relatively difficult to remove, at least relative to creatures, so it's not the easiest to deal with permanent type in the world, and every time you drop a land, you get a 2/2. It's insane, and there are plenty of times playing Field of the Dead where I would have absolutely taken the second mode on this card. Like, rather than make another 2 or 3 zombies when I drop a land, I would much rather just put counters on them. You know, once you've gone wide enough, sometimes it's time to make your creatures a little beefier so you can actually get in for the damage. So this card just does so many cool things, y'all. A 4-mana Field of the Dead, like, Field of the Dead was banned in like 2 formats. I'll take this card. I don't know why no one's talking about it. But we're in the top 3, everybody. Zendikar Retreat should have been like number 1. But we're in the top 3 here. And I'm going to start the top 3 with Scoot Swarm. I've seen some people talking about this, but almost never in a competitive application, right? Just some like really weird Scoot Swarm combo of some kind. Or like people saying, oh, you know, in a kitchen table way, I'd do in a casual way, I'd be liking that Scoot Swarm. But like no one thinks that it's real. And I think that's a mistake, everybody. I kind of think this looks like a biogenic ooze in a way, in that if it's left on the table for more than a couple of turns, then it gets really out of hand for anyone trying to play against it. The difference is that Biogenic Ooze costs 5 mana in a format that also had Nissa Who Shakes the World. Let's not forget that. So, and Cavalier of Thorns. You just can't play all these 5-drops in a deck. So Biogenic Ooze often got relegated to the sideboard of grindier matchups before just dropping off in playability altogether. This costs 3 mana, which is a world different than 5 mana, especially in matchups that you know are going to get grindy. You get this down on turn 3 and it stays protected for the majority of the game. You are going to go nutso on that board, my friends. So I love this card, and to a lesser extent, Iridescent Hornbeetle. I think that's a fun one to look at too. That's a sort of sideways similar, but if we're looking at cards that are just like have the most like banana nut bread potential, right? Scoot Swarm is right up there. Just a couple of turns with this card and your board could go absolutely bananas. Have I already said bananas? Either way, I'm just trying to think of like bonkers synonyms, because I definitely think that with just a couple of turns, and that's not actually hard to facilitate, right? I mean, we're in a standard with discontinuity, so can you imagine Scoot Swarm turns, infinite Scoot Swarms? That would be a fun deck, but I actually think this thing actually really does have competitive viability, but probably as a sideboard card in the same kind of applications we saw Biogenic Ooze used. But this costs 2 less mana than Ooze, and I actually think that makes all the difference in the world. Number 2 is Squad Commander, which is actually kind of like low-key one of my favorite cards in the set, period. 4 mana is a bit much, but you're always going to get 4 power for your 4 mana. That's going to be on 2 bodies, which isn't the worst deal in the world right there. But even if you have just one other party member when you play this, that's a different creature type than it, then you get, 5 power for your 4 mana, split among 3 guys. That's really good. Of course, when you do have a full party, this creates all the tokens, and this might be the absolute best, payoff for having a full party in the entire set. It could also be coveted prize, but if you're going full-on aggro and you actually want to attack for the win, I'd say an Anthem effect that also grants indestructibility on a full party is absolutely insane. So, yeah, I think this card is better than a lot of people are judging it, because, again, I haven't really heard anybody talk about it, but I kind of fell in love with this card from the first time that I read it, because I think if you are going to make the party deck, this is easily one of the best payoffs for it, by and large. It does cost a little bit of mana to cast, but if you're going to play the party deck, I'd like it a lot more than, Bozzery's Lieutenant from last set, and I really liked Bozzery's Lieutenant, so I gotta really like this card, right? It's gonna give you a bunch of bodies. That's better. That's good in multiple decks, not just the party deck. That's good in multiple kinds of decks, but especially in the party deck. Once you get the full payoff for having this, and you can swing indestructible with all your dudes, that's just a game-winning ability right there, so I love this card. So what's the number 1 sleeper in the entire set? What card meets at the nexus of most powerful with the least people talking about it, right? I think easily. It was easier to pick my number 1 sleeper this time than it's been in like 4 or 5 seasons, like since I can remember. My number 1 sleeper is Arden Electromancer. So this really doesn't look like much, right? Just a 3 mana, 3/2, kind of not the best stats in the world, right? But it's always going to pay you back at least 1 mana, and this is one of the times where I think costing 3 mana is actually kind of a net benefit for the card. If it was a 2-drop, the most you could really hope to get out of this on turn 2 is 2 mana, but that's still a Burning Tree Emissary. And honestly, Burning Tree Emissary, anytime a card is being compared to Burning Tree Emissary, you know it's a good card, son. Like that's, I mean, if you're even in the same conversation as Burning Tree, if you even do something sort of similar, then you're definitely a creature we need to pay attention to. In this case, you can play a 1-drop warrior, a 2-drop rogue, and then on turn 3, you drop this thing and it is effectively free for your 3/2. That's unbelievable. And obviously, you can do the Burning Tree Emissary trick where, you go turn 1 rogue, turn 2 warrior, turn 3 Electromancer into a Bone Crusher Giant or whatever. And then you just win the game. It's still a creature that creates at least 1 mana when it comes into play, so you can like Arden Electromancer and Shock on turn 3. And even that is a better play than you think it is. Any creature that creates mana when it enters the battlefield is always going to be worth looking at a lot more than you might think so. And again, of course, anytime you have 1 or 2 other creatures in your party, this becomes really desirable. And there's even a point in the game at which it creates mana, and that gets very dangerous, my friends. So really pay attention to Electromancer. I know it's just a vanilla 3/2, but making mana when it ETBs is always godlike. So really, really be thinking about Electromancer. This is a better card than you think it is. That's it for this one. That's right, I've got Snapple. That's it for this one, y'all. That's all my sleepers in this set. And honestly, even though this set is like fairly polarizing, a lot of people think it's good. More people probably think it's kind of... Well, I won't say that. I think a lot of people think it's good. A lot of people think it's bad. But the most people think it's kind of, mediocre set. Even with a set like this, it was kind of tough to pick out like 11 real actual sleepers because a lot of attention is being focused on these cards, right? Like if too much attention is being focused on a card and people are saying that card is bad, I can't really call that a sleeper, even if I want to advocate for it, right? So, it was still a little bit difficult to find these sleepers this time around, but I think we nailed it, and I don't think there's anything in the set that I missed, but I'm almost always wrong about that. So if there's a card that you don't think is getting enough attention, make sure to tell me down there in the comments section. And do all the other stuff, right? I just found out that, I think it's 70% of people that watch me aren't subscribed to me. So if you can, just sub to me. It takes no time, no effort, no money. Just to hit the subscribe button. I'm trying to get to 120,000 subs now. And we can do it. So hit the subscribe button. You probably want to be subscribed anyway. We got Deck Techs coming up, top 25 cards, all that stuff. And you can also, in case you want to actually watch me play Magic, then you can do that on Twitch TV/SBMTGDev. I'm going to be streaming Thursday evening Eastern Standard Time, sometime around probably 8 or 8:30 p.m. So make sure you do that if you got the time, friend. And of course, if you want to affect the course of YouTube history and vote on what decks we do this season, go on over to the Patreon, link in the description, or patreon.com/SBMTG, and you can pledge $1 a month. That's all I ask. $1 a month, less than a Twitch subscription. $1 a month. You can vote on what decks we do. Not a terrible deal. So hop on, do all the things if you can. If not, I'm just kind of glad that you're here and you're still watching. Watch time matters too. It helps me with the algorithm. So yeah. But anyway, I guess I'm done for this one. So get down there. Let me know how you felt about it and what other cards I should have been done talking about. And I will catch you cats later. I'm Dev from the place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind. I'm finally going to take a sip of this Snapple here. Bye. Snapple.